Hey friends, welcome to the Canyon Pathways podcast, where we invite you to live like a son and lead like a father. Canyon Pathways is a global community of men on the journey from the striving of servanthood to the freedom of sonship as we traverse the canyon that is midlife leadership. My name is Noel Bouché, and I'm the founder and part of the leadership team for this venture, and I'll be your guide throughout this podcast as we explore and discover what it means to live like a son so we can lead like a compassionate father. Great to be with you and eager for this episode. I have a really interesting conversation with my friend Jason Lee here in a bit, and I've gleaned a lot of insight and wisdom from him over the years and eager for you to do the same. But first, we're going to look at our field note for this episode. In this case, it's a field note on invest. Every field note is an exploration of a word, a single word, which is an embodiment of a concept that we believe is relevant to sonship, relevant to living like a son of God, so that out of that we can lead like a good father, lead like this God who is a father to us. And so this episode, we're looking at the word invest, our field note on invest, and we'll get to that in a second, but a few prefatory thoughts on that. When we say the word invest, our minds probably naturally kind of go to financial investments, investing in financial assets, in the financial markets. And it's some of us do that for a living professionally. Many of us are invested in the markets or investing in our ventures right now. And it's an interesting one because if we start there in the kind of the financial context where we have a whole vernacular and methodology of communicating about it, we can start to parse it and discern some principles that then we can apply to other areas of our life, because clearly we invest in many areas, not just in the markets. We invest our time, energy, thoughts, relational capital on a daily basis, and how we're investing that is important. And it has, of course, this kind of future-oriented element to it. To invest in something versus spending or to have an expense, an outlay today, to invest is a future-oriented exercise. So it has within it an element of delayed gratification. And so to do that, you have to have some vision for what that ultimate gratification is going to be, what that ultimate return is going to be. And we have to do that in every area of our lives. But I think about financial investments. Obviously, we all have our own philosophies, and we're hopefully investing according to them, not the whims of the market and the ebbs and flows of fortune, as it were. But there's also plenty of wisdom out there. I get it regularly from friends, CP brothers, who again are in this space on a daily basis, managing assets, advising clients financially. There's one that jumped out at me as I was thinking about it, just an axiom that is relevant, I think, to what we're talking about today. It's a quote from Warren Buffett, the Oracle of Omaha. He's got a pretty well-known one that says, "Be fearful when others are greedy, and be greedy only when others are fearful." Now, of course, it's, if we're trying to distill, principles out of it, it's a bit problematic for us, because in creating something that's pithy, he's using what are essentially two vices, of course, fear and greed. But we can pretty clearly discern what the precept is, and that's having eyes to see what's really going on. Because at the heart of this is, hey, when the herd mentality, when the markets are down, when there's a crisis, when everything's, chaotic, others are going to be fearful, and you have to have the discipline, you have to have the vision to be able to see what's really going on. You have to have prepared for this moment, mentally, emotionally, because probably you also have assets in those markets that are decreasing in value. You have had to have prepared for it, and you have to be ready to respond. You have to see the opportunity where others are only seeing threats. And you have to see the threat when others are only seeing opportunity. Markets are up, it's a bull market. You got to know where you are in that cycle. You have to have wherewithal. You have to have vision. And, it's ideas like that are at the heart of any wise investment thesis and the heart of the approach of any disciplined investor. But again, underneath that is this ability to see what others are not seeing. And the spiritual application is, we're going to dig into that here in a second, but to be able to see, to be able to have wisdom in a moment, wisdom from the Latin root, same root as our word vision. So wisdom is the ability to see, to perceive, maybe what is clouded, maybe what is camouflaged, maybe what is not being seen by others yet, what's not being perceived, maybe that very thing that is being thrown out there as a deception. We, of course, live life with an adversary who is two things: an accuser and a deceiver. That's his power. And to understand that we're up against a deceiver. We're not kind of going, pound for pound in the ring here. We're facing an adversary who, in most cases, is going to try to make himself invisible and fixate us on things that are not really there, make us fearful when we should see opportunity, make us anxious when we should see a moment to act or to share compassion, or to move boldly with courage, or to rest. But to see that thing for what it really is, to see the moment for what it really is important. And that leads us into the field note, because as you'll see here in a second, what prompted the exploration for me was a conversation I had with a brother, with a guy in midlife leadership, with a lot going on. And the word or the activity or the concept of investing was actually not what precipitated it. It was the word expense. It was the feeling of being burdened by expenses led to the exploration of really first, what is an expense actually, and then move quickly into the idea of investing and seeing something for what it truly is. Again, the moment for what it truly is, but also seeing the response to that moment for what it really is. And I took a lot away from this. So let's jump into the field note. We'll come around on the other side with some little deeper dive into some of the discoveries that came out of it, and eager to do that with you. But here's our field note on invest. Invest. Recently, I was talking to a friend, an impressive guy who was a star high school athlete, built a successful law practice, and recently launched a Bible teaching ministry while being very vulnerable about his own personal struggles throughout his life. We were sharing a meal and catching up on family news, which for him included several college-age kids and some of the highs and lows they'd walked through of late. He mentioned the pressures of running a business, paying a few truckloads of tuition, and just keeping things moving right now. Honestly, I feel like everything's an expense these days, and I'm treading just to keep my head above the water, he exhaled with a decidedly exhausted inflection. Many of us can relate. In this stage of life, we're launching ventures, managing people, raising tweens and teens, navigating the ups and downs of marriage, and oh, by the way, assisting parents as they age, while fielding increasing requests for charitable giving and philanthropic service. Others of us are carrying a different load, maybe the pain of divorce, or the still yet to be fulfilled desire for a spouse, perhaps the difficult work of picking up the pieces from a failed deal or enterprise, or the gut punch of a personal or professional betrayal. Possibly the numbing prospect of still trying to figure out a way forward here in midlife, while other peers seem to be firing on all cylinders. My friend's comment that it seems everything's an expense certainly resonated with me, but also got me thinking, why is it that everything feels like an expense? Because everything is? Or because my perspective makes it seem that way? So I investigated. Turns out it might be a bit of both. The English word expense comes from a Latin root meaning to pay or draw out of, the prefix ex meaning out as in exit, example, and exegesis. It helps us understand why a true cost seems to hurt, something we have to grin and bear, because something is being taken out of us. We're losing something that was previously in. which naturally led me to the word invest. While an expense is something taken out, clearly an investment is something put in, but into what? Different clothing, as it happens. An investment is putting something into a different vestment, different clothing, a different form, such as reclothing cash into shares of a company, or debt capital into real estate, or your time and talent into a salary. Our investment is essentially an act of taking one asset and clothing it with the form of another. Importantly, though, an asset we still have an interest in, whereas an expense is out the door, as it were. An investment is still in our portfolio, still something we can see a return on. And that begs the question, what are we seeking a return on? For too many in life, it's primarily financial assets or other things with a return that's easily measured. Titles and toys, followers and fame, zeros and zip codes, acquisitions and achievements. When we skew toward that perspective, which for me is one I need to resist moment by moment, it's easy to feel like we're drowning in expenses regarding the other outlays outside of those categories, and especially the outlays into people and relationships, which can so often disappoint. But if our vantage point is shared with the Divine One, our investments into the safety, growth, healing, maturation, and redemption of people and relationships need not feel like an expense taken out of us and lost forever, no matter the time horizon. They become literally a reclothing of momentary mammon, energy, and emotions into the beauty of the everlasting renewal of all things that is yet to be revealed. This is how a father secure in his sonship invests, because it is how the Father and the Son invest. Just as the Son emptied himself, took the form of a servant, reclothing himself with humanity, we are investing as a father when we reclothe our assets, our money, time, attention, affection, into the people around us for their growth, fullness, and flourishing. Our investments will soon turn into expenses, however, if we do not remain connected to the life of the Son, if we are not feasting as a son at the table of the Father. None of us can pour out continually. None of us can afford unending outlays on our own. We need regular infusions of spiritual and relational capital to be positioned to invest it into others. We need living water flowing into and out of us. Then we will be a river to our people. Before he left, he called together 10 of his servants and divided among them 10 pounds of silver, saying, "Invest this for me while I am gone." Luke 19:13. Okay, there's our field note on invest. Hope you enjoyed that and pulled directly out of that some not only insight, but some application of that insight immediately into your life and where you're at and what you're walking through. For me, it was really, this is contained in the field note itself. It was just a great discovery that what investment is reclothing one asset into the form of another. And we could talk for hours about it, but really, really helpful for me in my journey in terms of how I'm thinking about what's actually going on, what I'm actually doing, and what I actually think or expect or hope or fear is going to come out of it. And when we can just get clarity like that, it's going to help us. And so I got 3 points for you just to follow up and things that you might be able to apply, wherever you're at in your journey right now and whatever part of the canyon of midlife leadership that you're in. But here's the first one. It started with a conversation with a friend, very successful guy by all outward appearances, but going through it and admitting that he was going through it and going through some real difficulties that one is going to experience in this stage and in leadership. But the statement, everything feels like an expense. If you feel that way, you're not alone. If you feel that way right now and you're in midlife, you feel that way as you lead a family perhaps, or as you build, or as you continue to work and move forward in your life. If everything feels like an expense, it's hard, but it's okay. You're not alone in it. It is actually part of the journey. That's one of our main things here at Canyon Pathways is that midlife is a unique life stage. It is a canyon. You have people looking to you for leadership, drawing out of you, demanding. You've got perhaps aging parents. You've got clients, customers. You've got perhaps a marriage, children. A lot of things, no matter where you are being asked of you in this stage. And sometimes those asks are internal. Sometimes those struggles are just the ones we put on ourselves, and some of the regrets or disappointments that we're feeling, thinking about, or dealing with in this stage of life. But this is one of them, that it just feels like everything's an expense. Everything is an expense, said my friend. And know that you're not alone, and that the Canyon Pathways community certainly is a community you can come to and say, hey, this is how I'm feeling, and know that you're not actually isolated in that. You're going to find that this is a part of the journey. And there's comfort in that because that's how we are attacked. It's not only deception, it's not only accusation, but all of that. The goal of that is isolation. It's to separate out the one from the other 99. And that's how you attack. That's what your goal is. That's then where we're vulnerable. And of course, that's part of midlife, that we, as men in midlife leadership roles, we have a tendency towards isolation. And we have to push back against that. So this is one way, just knowing, hey, this is actually, I'm not the only one experiencing it. I'm not the only one feeling like everything in my life is an expense right now, an expense financially, energy, physically, relationally, an expense, not everything. I'm not the only one who feels like everything is expensive, X being taken out of me. I'm not the only one feeling depleted. I'm not the only one feeling exhausted, exhausted, and angry, like the elder sibling in the Luke 15 parable. We're not alone. So that's important. That's a big thing for me. It led to, obviously, part of this investigation. And then the second thing is just perspective. I mean, we know this, that this is fundamental to wisdom, is having the right perspective, being able to step back to have perspective. That's one of the outcomes of a retreat, and why we focus on retreats, is because it's a chance to retreat from the front line and step back and not only be refreshed, but just gain a different perspective. You know, as you can zoom out on that issue, that problem, that thing that's demanding of you, that thing that is just feels like a constant source of expense. We can zoom out, our perspective changes. So healthy perspective is fundamental to any progress, any problem solving, any receiving of the things of God. Again, because we have forces around us, both internally in our mortality and death and sin playing itself out, and externally, spiritually, we have an adversary trying to deceive so that we don't have the right perspective. To have the right perspective allows us to rightly not just think about, but address things and act and respond. And so sometimes what feels like an expense, feels like it, that's fine. But maybe when we step back, it's not. I'm actually investing, and it changes everything that, it changes the calculus. It changes what you're expecting out of that situation. If it's an expense, if this financial expense or relational expense, or just the energy I'm pouring out here, or this frustration with this management situation, or in my marriage, or with a child, young child or adult child that I'm walking through something with, feels like an expense, like things are being taken out of me. Maybe it's an investment. Maybe I need to step back and get my perspective right and say, this is not being taken out of me in a way that's lost forever. Maybe what I'm doing here, got to reset, and I'm investing. I am investing in this relationship. I am investing in this situation. I am investing in this opportunity. I'm investing in this conversation. I'm investing in breaking the power of the secret in my life so that I can experience freedom where there has been isolation previously. It's an investment. It's still in the portfolio. It's in such a way that we're going to see a return on that. We're going to see growth, and we're going to see something come back to us, even if it's a long time horizon. Hard to invest in that 401k when you're in your 20s for some of us. Such a long time horizon. Doesn't even seem real. But you have to have the right perspective. You have to then respond accordingly to that. And so perspective is important. And then lastly, just the reality that what to invest is doing is you're reclothing something You're putting it into a new form. You're putting this asset into the form of another. You're taking this and now putting it into that. You're taking cash, putting it into this, share. Everything that we talked about in the field note. We're taking this energy and I'm going to put it into this person in the form of connection, and going to relate to them. Rather be doing something else, if I was honest in this moment, but I'm going to reclothe this energy, this wisdom, this understanding, this knowledge, this perspective, this desire, this emotion, and I'm going to reclothe it into words to this person. I'm going to reclothe it into a time investment into this situation. I'm going to aid them in a certain way. I'm going to take all this capital that I've been wasting in my life on myself in one way or another, and I'm going to instead deploy it over here. And that, for me, is, I think we all have a tendency, maybe, some of us might be a spendthrift by nature, but we have a tendency to hoard it first, even if we're a spendthrift. Even if we're going to hate, the younger son in Luke 15 first had to say, give me everything. Give me what I'm going to be due in my inheritance. Give it to me now so I can blow it, ultimately. But you have to have we all are prone to this kind of taking and hoarding. And that comes out of mortality. That comes out of death. That comes out of what Scripture might call the flesh. Because spiritually, when we look at our God, who's our creator, redeemer, who's a father unto us, there's just no hoarding. There's just constant giving out of an infinite source, constant flow, like the river that never fails. And that's how we lead like a father, is giving, by redeploying these things that we have over here into this other asset or thing, or again, relationally, this conversation or this time commitment. It's redeploying. And that's what, any capital is meant to be deployed. And that's what we're doing here. We're reclothing the things that we are stewarding, the things that have come to us through whatever source. Might have been hard work at one point. It might have been in true inheritance. Might have been luck. As we step back and say, that was God working in my life, and I now have this thing. Even the hard thing I went through, even that experience, even that addiction, even that valley of the shadow, even that loss, even that grief is now an asset that should be deployed, that can be deployed, that if I'm leading like a father, I'm going to deploy and give to others for their edification, for their growth, for their covering, for their protection. And we see that in many areas. It's like my mind goes to taxes. There's a time to harvest losses, and we don't want losses. You invest in that venture, and we're looking for a 10x return. But not every venture is going to turn out that way. Most of them won't. And so what do? You harvest your losses, and then what does that become? That becomes its own asset. That becomes a write-off. It's not it doesn't have the value that we wanted or hoped for, but it still has value. And that's all about perspective and seeing something for what it truly is. And in this case, seeing what we feel and are being burdened by as an expense, instead viewing it as an investment, which is a complete shift of our perspective. All right, time to move into our sonship story segment. And in this episode, we're talking with my friend Jason Lee. Jason has a master's degree in human development psychology from UCLA and a master's in Christian leadership from Dallas Theological Seminary. For the past few years, he's been an adult ministry pastor at a multi-campus church here in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. And as we were recording this, he was right in the middle of a new adventure as he and his wife and their two young children were preparing to relocate to East Asia. So really an interesting time to chat with him about his Canyon Pathways experience. And I started the conversation by asking him how he would describe his sonship journey in one word.
It would be messy, hands down, just messy. I wish that I could have a better word for it, but it's messy. I think just this newer concept to really live into the Canyon Pathway ethos, because we've heard about, sonship, we've heard about the prodigal son story and all that stuff, but to really paint it in this picture of, and really for me to experience it. And now my whole world is shaped in like, okay, how am I living like a son today? Or, man, I just was derailed for the last week, 2-3 weeks, and I needed some sort of thing to anchor me. It's more of like, how am I living as a son? It's like, oh man, yeah, not really living as a son right now. I mean, I'm living as a son, but not the way that I think I hear more in my time of prayer, come home. I need you to come home. So yeah, it's honestly, it's just been messy. There are times where I feel really in the flow, feeling really connected with the Father. And then there are times I'm like, what happened? Where am I? I've completely derailed and completely kind of lost track of sight. Yeah, so it's been a messy journey for sure.
When you're not living as a son or not feeling the attributes of sonship, when something's derailed, as you put it, and it's not that, what is it? What do you describe it as?
I think my wife is a really good meter for that, which is you're just so angry all the time. You're like you're very wound up and angry. I tend to see the world as checklists, things to accomplish, things to get done. I feel very weighted down by responsibilities. And good things turn into, they turn into almost like idols, and distractions, and really just added weight on my shoulders. Physically, my body will physically feel like my neck and my shoulders are super tight, hard to breathe, just never settled. And so my body is telling me something, but also just where my mind goes. People become more as tasks than image bearers. And so when I'm not walking as a son, that's where I'm at.
It echoes the Luke 15 elder sibling, doesn't it? Your description of not walking or living or working or being like a son.
Yeah,
angry,
it's
tight, exhausted,
duty bound,
railing about the messiness.
Oh yeah, all I see are the messy. Like everything is not how it's supposed to be. Everything is not in order. How do I bring things back into my control? And really just like, I really lose, like the world becomes less colorful in a sense. It's not saturated. It's not lively. I don't want to say black and white because it's kind of cliche, but like everything's just muted. My feelings are muted. My reality is muted. It's hard to engage emotionally with people, especially the people who I love the most, my wife and my kids. In fact, the messiness has a lot to do with sometimes the feedbacks that my wife gives me and the feedback that my kids give me at times where I can just sense like they're nervous around me because I'm just so uptight. And I'm a little bit more stern. So yeah, and then you're confronted. I'm confronted with that reality and I feel very ashamed. And I feel like, man, here I go again. I screwed this up again. And usually that's when I'm like, okay, am I living like a son right now? I'm not living like a son right now. And then I go through that process of like, well, let me just give all the really good excuses of why, instead of humbling myself and like listening to God's call. Hey, just come home. Can you just come home? And my response is, you can't get anything done when I go home. And so I don't go home. until I'm exhausted. And then I'm like, okay, let me go take a nap, rest. But I had that ticking, okay, but this still needs to get done. This still needs to get done. This still needs to get done. These are the people who I need to contact. These are the people I need to follow up with. This, yeah. Yeah. So my Canyon word is lift. And it took me some time to process it. I think even that night, you gave space for the guys to kind of comment on it. And I think I just said, like, I need time to process this. And I think part of it was, this was a completely new experience of like, oh, he's going to give me a word. It's like, okay, that's weird. And two, it just was such a random word, but yet it had some sort of meaning. But because I was in such in a heightened state of being in a mode of crisis just in my life, I just needed time to like sit with it. I didn't have the mental capacity to respond to it immediately. So I was like, I just need to hold on to it. And I think afterwards, there were a lot of things that I was able to connect that was very helpful. And I think it gave, what I love about this word is that I feel like it ages well in my life. It's something that I can continue to discover as I walk into the sonship. And I think, at that moment, you said, the Father just wants to lift you. You've been doing a lot of caring for a lot of people, your family, your marriage, people. You've been doing a lot of lifting. The Father wants to lift you. And I was like, I would love that. I just don't know how to experience that. I just want to. I long for it, but I was just not at a place to necessarily receive it at that moment. So I needed that time.
You longed for it, but maybe you didn't have a word for it, and that provided a simple word or conceptual framework for it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It almost gave me like this permission to own it almost. It's like, okay, this was given to me by a relationship that you and I have. And I was at a very vulnerable space and was desperate for something. I was like, God, I just need something. And so there was that something. And so I had that choice of like, okay, I could put this under a microscope and put on my theological lens through this whole thing and just kind of dissect it, because that seems safer than just to open-handedly, okay, let me just receive this and trust this process, whatever it is. And I don't need to feel like I needed to have some sort of control and to manipulate whatever I needed to. I was just like, let me just take it in, because that's part of the Canyon Pathways ethos, is we are there to rest and receive. What immediately comes to my mind is this saying, everybody is looking for someone looking for them. And I think as men, especially when we grow up with fathers who don't necessarily spend that face-to-face time or even shoulder-to-shoulder time, we also seem to lack words being spoken into our lives. And I think there is this longing for to be spoken to, and for words that have meaning to resuscitate something in our lives, or to heal a part of our lives, or to fill a part of our lives. We've been wounded by our fathers. Maybe we were missing something from our fathers. And when there is a space where another man is going to create this moment of safety, vulnerability, authenticity, and really it's a sacred moment that I don't think us men necessarily experience often. And to say, hey, this is what, when I've been praying for you, this is what God kind of reveals. There is this added notion of like, okay, we are also longing to hear from our Father as well. That is maybe a little bit different than the typical evangelical, I'm just going to pray, thank you, God, for today. Thank you. Give me some health and be with my family, that kind of stuff. But this is like a completely, especially the circles that I run with, that's not what we really experience. And so to have that moment and space for something that is unique, but also powerful, I think there is something that we as men are desperately longing for. Again, whether to be healed or for something to be filled, or something to be resuscitated or come back alive to. That's what canyon words do to men, I think. Do I really believe the Father is loving me in my messiness as a son right now? Because I have to combat, if I just clean this side of myself, God will love me. Right. And that's something that we all struggle with. But I think what's been helpful for me is, okay, does the Father love me right now? Can he love me right now in this mess, in this resistance that I have? Is his love for me just as great as if I didn't have those resistance? And then the next layer down, which is where I think I'm currently wrestling with, is, okay, I may be good that God loves me here, but I'm having a hard time loving myself here. And I am honestly going to confess, I don't know what to do with that. I know God loves me in this mess, but I don't love me right now in this mess. And why is it that my self-perception is overstepping God's perception of me, even though I know that God's perception of me is more important than my own perception of myself? I get it, but that's the reality that I'm wrestling through. And I have to believe that there are guys out there that are like, yep, I'm there too. And so for those listeners who are struggling with that, I'm there in it. You're not alone.
So this might just flow right into it. What does it mean to you? Messiness, life lost, lift, might flow into how Jason answers. What does it mean to you to live like a son and live like a father?
For me, it starts with acceptance. I have to accept what is. I have to accept that my life is messy. I have to accept that I wish I could be much further down the road that I would like to be, but this is the current reality and I accept it, and that's okay. So the Serenity Prayer has been such a life vest, really. I need to have, the serenity to accept the things that I can't control and the courage to change the things that I can, but then, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I rarely finish the prayer because I have to, I rest at serenity. I'm not at peace right now. God, give me the peace. Lift me from this burden. Lift me from the crazy things that are going on in my head, all the to-do lists. Like, give me that peace so that I can accept. And when the Father brings me to a point of accepting what is, I don't really need to pray the rest because I'm like, I just need that. I just need to get there. So that's what it means right now personally. And then I think to lead like a father, I have, out of everything in my life right now, I have the most vision of what it means to be a father. I have these great principles and vision that I have for my kids that I feel very, I'm not confident in a lot of things, but for some reason I have a lot of confidence as being a father. And I think a lot of it has a lot to do with, I just read a lot about parenting. But I think most of my fervent prayers have been, God, just help me see how you see them so I can nurture them. So this international move, what stories do I want my kids to share one day? It's that vision of, okay, this is how I'm going to invest in that, in their life, and build them up in character and help them to be resilient kids and help them to be thoughtful. And so, yeah, I love being a dad. It's just, if I could be paid to do it full time, I would do it in a heartbeat. I love being a dad. Yeah, so that's where I'm at.
Great insights and honesty from Jason Lee. Messy. That's what living like a son and leading like a father can feel like. And we don't like to hear that. We like in our environment and in our efforts to have tidiness, to have control over all operations and outcomes we invest ourselves in. But we don't. The world around us and all the people and places and projects in it are not controllable, never have been. So the question for us is, how will we respond to that? How will we invest in such a volatile, uncertain, complex reality? Are we going to create false narratives and expectations that lead to shame and apathy, like the younger sibling in Luke 15, or that lead to anger and exhaustion, like the elder sibling? Or will we proactively, patiently be present and continue to invest our resources in the midst of all of it, like the father in the parable, and like our Father, and the incarnate Son who represented and reflected that Father and Redeemer to a messy world? Hope you enjoyed this episode. Share it with people in your network and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Also, check out the show notes for links, as well as we got a PDF there with reflection questions if you'd like to use this episode for personal reflection personally or in small group gatherings with others as we continue to develop a language of sonship through this pod and gather stories from men in midlife leadership around the globe. Thanks to the team at Maroon Harpoon for producing this episode, and lots of gratitude as always to all of our donors who make the Canyon Pathways community possible. And as always, thank you for being part of this community as we together live like sons and lead like fathers.